we have to talk about consciousness. Our life is actually a midpoint between the two deaths. To use the sexual energy in order to achieve enlightenment. The three-dimensional spiral shape encoded in our DNA, in our biology.
Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Discomfort-Zone podcast with me, your host, Olev. Now, a little heads up before we start. I'm actually not 100%. I had a pretty crazy day and crazy few weeks, and it's been very, very hectic. All very good things, but a lot of work, and I'm afraid I haven't been taking the most care of myself. It's hard to get a good night's sleep with everything going on, so I'm not 100% today, which is why I decided to make a little bit of a different episode, but I hope entertaining and maybe even educational as well, just taking a sidestep from Drunvelo's heavier technical stuff and talk about some things that I'm interested in and that I felt were relevant. So that's a little heads up as to what's going on in this show. Rondon, great to see you here. Thank you for coming, and I'm glad that no one else is in chat right now, because that takes off the pressure a little bit. I can see my levels are a little bit high, so let me know if anything sounds too much. I don't want to clip. Okay, we'll try that. Let me know how that sounds. Anyway, so let's just jump right into it. And I'm actually happy to say, and a reminder for those listening, that we've actually been getting a few more listeners on the podcast, on the episodes that I release. So thank you very much for those who are listening, and if you are sharing this and letting people know, it's very much appreciated. And I thought that in the spirit of having a few new faces, shall I say, it might be worth talking a little bit about the podcast, the idea, and why I'm doing it the way that I am. Abigail Honey, welcome. Lovely to have you here. Oh, good, I'm glad. Run Mobile. I'm glad it sounds good. So, this episode I wanted to dedicate to talk about a possibly unusual topic. And I admit that when I shared this idea with my wife, it took a little explaining to get it across. So I hope it's understandable, and if not, let me know in chat if you got any questions, as always. But I wanted to talk about the connection, as spurious as it may be, between self-sufficiency and conspiracies. And the reason I thought about this was because last week I mentioned our company's new consultancy in water management, shameless plug, but I said something which sort of, I then listened to it again, and I said that in my day-to-day life I deal much more with this self-sufficiency than I actually do sort of researching conspiracies or even dedicating too much time to the theories. And obviously the podcast is a place where I direct all of that energy to, and I've wanted to have this outlet for a long time. But I felt that it might seem a little disconnected, and that perhaps for someone listening it could seem like the fact that I'm going into this direction of self-sufficiency is a step away from conspiracies, or somehow not connected. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about what I feel is a very strong connection, and indeed in my personal life, in my personal beliefs, these two are very much related. And where I am today and the work that I'm doing here with self-sufficiency was very organically grown. No pun intended. But was a development from the world of conspiracies that I came from. And so I hope that's enough of an introduction to sort of put across what I'm trying to talk about here. This idea that the podcast started as an ecovillage podcast, completely, not even primarily, but totally designed towards talking about the different models of ecovillages and what we were thinking of doing here. And then this very sudden, or could seem abrupt shift into ancient aliens and different researchers' work and all of these very could seem unrelated issues. So, with that, I thought we could start by actually investigating the conspiracies themselves, because I feel that that's what I felt was where I could give the most of myself. I felt that I have all of this information regarding conspiracies, both in past and the way that they affect our everyday lives today, and I felt that this information has become too relevant and too important to ignore and to continue talking about other things. And so that's why I felt the need to share. And so I wanted to start by exploring this idea a little bit. What is it about conspiracies? Why am I so into them? And why do I think as many people as possible should be exposed to this information by whatever means, not just my podcast? So I thought one of the possibly the most crucial issue to be dealt with, and the most important part of all of this, is our future. Our future, both as individuals and as, a collective, a species. Oh, hi, Avian Flu. Great to see you here. Thank you for joining. Missed you last week, I believe it was. So I'm glad to see you're back. You have a show afterwards, right? You can stay tuned for that, whoever we're listening to the live. Not only the future of humanity as a collective and us individuals, but really of, how we want to live our lives and see things evolve, and to really give some thought to this issue. And this is a very easy issue to be talking about in 2021. We see more and more this joke. I don't know if you see it about 2020 being this horrendous year that everyone was very had a very difficult time with, and I'm obviously not making light of that at all, but it's made, first of all, it's caused the world of conspiracies to flourish like it never has, and suddenly conspiracies are becoming so mainstream, and beyond that also people are much more, I think, grim, less optimistic, more anxious about the future. And this is, of course, a very natural, I think, and a healthy response to this shit show that we see going on over quite some time for those who have been watching. So I thought it would be a good idea to break down some of these problems that I personally feel are not just the most crucial, because I don't want to put some kind of scale of importance on these problems. I think each of these exists, and probably some people have an affinity to one more than the other. But these, I feel, are the problems that we both can address to a certain degree, and indeed are more urgent in terms of their effect. So that's basically, but within this list that I'm going to sort of go through, they're not organized in terms of their hierarchical importance in any way. So this is just a randomly put together, maybe not random, but it's not importance. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was economy. And obviously that's probably the easiest one. I think anyone today can ramble enough about the problems with the economy, at least that we're seeing. I hope anyone would be able to see the problems. Perhaps that's a bit optimistic. But I felt the need nonetheless to address it, since not addressing it would seem quite oblivious to the situation. And I'm referring specifically not just to the capitalist economic system as a whole, which is obviously has its own fair share of, shall we say, flaws, but specifically the repercussions of the pandemic that we're experiencing now, and the repercussions that are actually going to show themselves over the next few years and possibly decades, depending on what happens. And I feel that this is a subject that, though obviously some people are talking about, mainly economists, not enough people are paying so much attention to the fact that this is not just about getting the vaccine. This is not just about getting back to normal life and opening up the shops. there is going to be a stage, a sort of backlash of all of this year plus lack of activity, economically speaking, and I should be clear, I'm not an economist in any way. I've studied the amount of economy I need to feel that I can sort of understand what's going on, but I can in no way sort of analyze markets and see trends. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about literally looking at the fact that we constantly see throughout the history of capitalism that when there is a dip in that growth, when consumers aren't buying, when money isn't flowing through the economy, everyone is worse off and everything turns to shit. Well, possibly not quite everyone. I think a few people do manage to benefit from those situations, but let's just say the majority definitely suffer from that situation. I think that this is a very important issue that we need to be thinking about it, each of us, obviously on a national level, possibly even a global level of addressing this, but there's very little that I can do about that. But on an individual level, I do believe that we should be considering this, if not for ourselves, then for possibly, the next generation or whoever it is that you think about when you think about the future. And if there are some people who don't think about the future at all, then I guess this episode really isn't geared towards them. But for those of us who are in some way considering what the world will look like in 2, 5, 10 years, I think the state of the economy and the ability of people to continue living the way that we have and just running our day-to-day lives the way that we have should bear some considering looking ahead. But anyway, that's just my take on it. And the economy in general, obviously, and indeed capitalism, there is a lot more that can be said. I think one of the other things that's coming out of this pandemic, at least the voice that I'm hearing more and more, is a strong anti-capitalist movement by certain experts who either were more silent or silented until now, but who are saying basically this capitalist machine that's been created, that's sort of completely unguided, and obviously it has its rules, but there is no one who is conducting this whole thing. It really is at this point a beast that's grown, out of its creator's control. It certainly is quite a delicate or perhaps even fragile system, as we see the way that it deals with crises, the way that it deals with sudden changes, whether in, human behavior, consumption behavior, whether it's in industrial changes, of any kind. The capitalist system is not a system that's robust in the sense that it's not flexible when it's dealing with great changes. And that seems to be a key for survival on any level that we want to think about it. When we think about the actual, physical level of species surviving, those are the species that manage to adapt quickly enough to stay ahead of the curve and keep up with the times as they're changing, climate changes or, environmental changes of any sort. And of course, there is emotional or psychological flexibility when we're faced with a terrible trauma of any sort. We can benefit from having the flexibility to be able to deal with it and to be able to change, our perception and our being in order to accommodate the new reality. And when people don't have that flexibility or are unable to, that's when they get seriously psychologically injured. And indeed, the same can be said about concepts in general and conceptualizations, capitalism being an idea. If an idea is not flexible enough to change with the times, can't evolve to a more, sustainable or a long-term way, then the idea is doomed to become extinct. So this is a rule of thumb that exists, I think, in nature. This is the nature of change. Change that comes basically either leaves whatever is there behind or adapts it to the change. So the same is true for this way of life that we've developed and indeed enjoyed. Certainly, I would say over the last probably 40 or 30 years, something like that. This golden age of capitalism where everything is just in this exponential growth, and it doesn't matter what industry it is. But now we see, with this high-tech, completely unbelievable numbers of growth due to technological advancements that don't require production, that you can just have people, logging in with their phones, and that's creating money out of this bubble. So the kind of growth that we see with these obviously high-tech companies, that whole situation is not very flexible, and it's not very adaptive, because if something changes in the mind flow, if anything if anything too much changes, then they will fail. I apologize, Ron. Yes, this is going to be a little bit of a a trigger episode, but I hope that in the end we'll be able to come around full circle and see why everything is okay. So I promise you, there's a happy ending to this in my mind, at least. But yes, the economy. I hope. I mean, everyone I talk to and everyone I know, down to my parents, my friends, my acquaintances, everyone is aware that the economy is not functioning properly. Certainly not at its optimum state. I assume there must be a few people in the whole world, because there always is, that do feel that the economy shouldn't change and that it's going great, but I'm not really capable of communicating with those people. So we agree on that. Now, from the economy, we're going to go to a different direction completely. And this is, I think, a crucial problem that people are talking about more and more, and yet it feels like, okay, what are we supposed to do about this? And that is drinking water. Now, it's been mentioned a few times, and they said the next, world war will be fought over water, and it's going to be the most valuable resource, etc., etc. But beyond all of that, we can see very clearly how we mistreat water, and I think that maybe personally I do notice it a little bit more. But it seems that on all the levels, our the way that we have disconnected from water has grown to such an effect that we almost don't notice it. We don't really think about water all that much. And again, obviously, I say we. This isn't everyone, and there are a lot of people that I know who are becoming much more aware of their water, and I think that's repairing the relationship that we have with water. But nonetheless, definitely the majority of us can turn on a tap, and we have to sort of be told by an advert that you shouldn't leave the water just running if you're not using it, indefinitely. You should turn it off. In some countries, in other countries, they don't actually say that either, and it's considered okay. But it's quite unbelievable. Oh, I see. Sorry, I missed some things in chat here. Let me just see. The exponential growth model of the current system is directly related to the inflationary policy of the Federal Reserve, which is anything but capitalistic. Yes, capitalism in its true sense, in the original sense, is nothing like this form, this bastardization of capitalism that we see today. And I believe personally that the same could be said for democracy, which started as a very different idea than what we have today. But never mind. And no one even has a clue what economy means. They think it means circulating money. Yeah, there's a great South Park episode where they go to investigate the economy. I can't remember exactly what it's called. It's a very famous one. It's a great episode. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But yes, and I absolutely, I definitely feel that I wouldn't call myself in any way an expert of economy, and I don't really want to. But economy, like politics, is something that affects all of us tremendously. And we all deal with it on a day-to-day basis without understanding it. The same way we do with contracts. All of us click OK, agree, without reading. I'm assuming, but I must admit that I have a few times tried to read one of these digital contracts when you're downloading software or signing up for whatever. But it really is difficult. Not only getting through it, I could sort of read through it as a sort of, but I can't say I understand everything that's being said. I sit and try. So, we always are dealing with these concepts and languages that are above our understanding and expected to, and indeed, follow suit and comply entirely. And we'll be talking about this soon as well. Okay, but yeah, exactly. That's the episode Rondon's put up in chat if you can see. Have you ever read Charles Eisenstein's Sacred Economics? I've heard of Charles Eisenstein. I don't think I've heard of the book Sacred Economics. I don't know if people post legal notices to Facebook. Yes. So I was talking about. Sorry, I'll get back on track now, but keep going in chat because I will come back to reading it. I just don't do it always at the same moment. So, but this is a more, I said at the beginning also for those who've missed, this is a more free and open episode. We're a little less on top of things, so it's all good. Darsico, I didn't see you join. Welcome. Lovely to have you as always. So, drinking water, I think we all can imagine that if there is some kind of shortage or problem, then water is not just for us to drink, but it's also for everything else that we use, for cooking, for cleaning, for our food, any kind of food, whether it's livestock, whether it's plants, etc., etc., etc. So, food is the source of life, quite literally, not just in a linear timeline sense that it had to come first, but indeed there is life where there is water, and wherever there is no water, there is no life. So this is obviously a crucial matter. And as such, it seems very far removed. What is it that we can really do as individuals to impact the situation in any way? I mean, I believe that there is a certain limit that we can do to what we can do in terms of our personal behavior. We can obviously conserve water as much as possible. We can reuse water. We can do things on an individual level. But nonetheless, when we're talking about a shortage of drinking water, a global shortage of drinking water, this is a much more serious problem. And I do believe that it's one that obviously not everywhere. There are some very lucky places that have quite a lot of drinking water and will probably be okay. But there are some places that are experiencing droughts, and it seems that they will be worsening in the coming years. And it will be very interesting to see what happens then. But nonetheless, drinking water is definitely a big problem, and it's obviously, in one way or another, related to my next issue that I wanted to bring up, which is the climate. Now, I'm not here to talk about all of these trigger words like climate change or like, global warming or anything like that. This has nothing to do with any kind of research that needs to be done on these fluctuations of temperatures. Not to dismiss that, just I want to focus on practicality and personal experiences. What do we as humans, as individuals, each and every one of us experience that we can relate to and that we can understand? And when it comes to climate, we might not all experience it because we're obviously not always aware of the same things, but we have the ability to experience. There seems to be a change in the climate, in the seasons, in the temperatures, in the weather. And I've sort of noticed it over the last 2 or 3 years. I don't actually know when it started, and I can't categorize it scientifically because I'm not talking about a study. But I noticed that the summers were sort of, changing the times of the year when they were coming, and were starting to be sort of either longer or the winters being more sporadic. And then I started noticing more and more people just basically mainly online creators, YouTubers and streamers, Twitch streamers. And they were sort of, every once in a while, but someone would mention, yeah, and it's snowing now, and that's crazy, it's never snowed. Or no. And then on the news, all these sort of different weather patterns that are very unusual and erratic for certain places. So there seems to be this kind of shift. Now, this shift is, however we look at it, this is absolutely natural. It doesn't matter right now, as far as I'm concerned, for what I'm saying. It doesn't matter, who caused it or what caused it or when. This was always going to be the situation, and we know for a fact that Earth is a very volatile planet that has been in a tremendously peaceful state for a very, very long time, quite overdue, some would say. And with this, as we mentioned before, with flexibility, we have to be flexible with the climate that we can tolerate. And if anything, we become tremendously stiff with our tolerance. Again, I say we, us. I'm obviously not referring to those who aren't like this, but those who use fans, those who go into the shade, those who, those of us who don't experience the four seasons in that same way, where we can sort of get up in the morning, go to the car, get from the car to work, leave work, go back to the car and go back home, and just not experience the climate to that degree. And part of the reasons for that is that the climate is tremendously peaceful and accommodating. And so with a little bit of tweaking here and there, you can really be okay. But as soon as climates can change to what they have in the history of Earth, well, most of those we simply cannot survive no matter what we do. But certainly we seem to be much more inflexible towards those changes in climate should they come in the future, and we seem to be experiencing those in droughts, floods, etc. Already. So I do believe that this is something important that we need to address. And again, climate can mean a variety of things. I could be talking about the pollution, I could be talking about, but what I'm focusing on, honestly, this is for me, is this individuals list, the list that affects me personally and my family, and what is within the scope of what I can do to sort of prepare for it best I can, shall we say. And so now I wanted to talk about a few other things which are slightly unrelated and more sort of amorphous. But the first is what we started talking about before, which is civil rights, which I'm not sure how to phrase it. And if any of you know, George Carlin had a great bit close to one of his last sets where he talks about, civil rights. There's no such thing as civil rights. We believe that there are just, God-given rights that we always have, but they're not, and they can be taken away. And so the term civil rights, could be a slightly misleading one for what I'm trying to say. But I do believe that civil rights should be something. They're simply something that we constantly have to protect and uphold and be vigilant about, because they can disappear. They're not God-given rights, because, nobody gave them for a long, long time. We, as a species, had to evolve and better ourselves and understand enough to realize that these are basic civil rights that, everyone should deserve. So that's why I'm sticking by the name. This probably would have been a much more difficult issue to persuade people of before the pandemic. But again, for the same reason that this podcast took a sharp turn when the pandemic started, we all, I think, experience a lockdown is basically an impediment to civil rights. Now, whether it's justified or not as a political decision, and I'm not talking about politics here at all, the fact of the matter is that one of our basic civil rights is to allow the freedom of movement and the freedom to work. And when those are encroached upon, that's literally taking away of those basic civil rights. And this is, again, not a point to contest, because the question of whether that should be allowed in order to protect civilians, etc., is a completely, I wouldn't say irrelevant question, but it's a very different question to what I'm saying, which is we as human beings are experiencing, or I shouldn't say really human beings, more, let's say, in Western society, modern Western society. If you go back 100 years and even 50 years, the basic freedoms that people enjoyed, again, in developed Western countries, were far greater than they are today. And I assume that everyone is quite familiar with what I'm talking about, but perhaps this idea might have escaped some of you. And so I'll elaborate a little bit more what I mean. And many, many comedians have spoken about this. I think that's why I noticed it in the first place. It's this idea of sort of legislation and registration and licensing. And so many years ago, if you wanted to, climb a rock, or if you wanted to go swimming in a lake, or if you wanted to go fishing, you could. And it wasn't even legally recognized. I mean, it would be ridiculous for people then to think that could be something that was wrong in any way. Now, obviously, if you overfish and it's happening, etc., I'm not saying that should be the way things are done always, but the fact is that back then, people had a lot more individual freedoms, and the government and the legislative and the authorities had much less power over an individual's choice. Basically, as long as you're not hurting, as long as you're not setting a forest on fire, or doing something that's really destructive, nobody would say anything, really and truly. And even, I was listening to a podcast today by Darren Doherty, and he talks about in the 1950s, when keyline farming was first invented, you could go onto your land and you could build and dig as many ponds as you wanted, whatever size, pretty much. And as long as you didn't cause any damage, you were probably legal in doing so. I assume that if you do something that then causes, damages or whatever, you could retroactively be punished. But generally speaking, no one was even thinking about going and checking what people were doing. Whereas now, and especially in the US, and there are different places with different, obviously, levels of authority that the government has, but in a lot of places, Israel included, UK included, the government can come to your private property and inspect your land and see what buildings you have, etc., and can tell you one way or another that either you're not allowed to, or it will cost you an X amount of money, or you have to register it. Now, I'm not saying that this is a bad idea. Again, obviously, these rules were set into place originally because, well, it's very interesting. If you've ever gone to, personally, I had this experience in India. I think a lot of other countries will have it as well. But if you go to somewhere where that's not the case, and where you still have people basically doing whatever they want, you see some very extreme things, like 6 people riding a motorcycle, or like people balancing this huge thing on their head while walking on this narrow 2x4, or just, having fun or playing around or doing nonsense that could end up hurting someone and being, dangerous. And it's amazing that huge difference that's happened. That wasn't, it didn't happen so long ago, this change of super, safe and keeping everyone in this, wrapped up in this, cotton wool so that they don't hurt any one of themselves. This nanny state that's sort of developed. It's not that long that it's been going on. So it's quite shocking to see the difference. And I think that, again, I'm not saying that this is wrong inherently, but it is another sign of civil rights being taken away. And whether these are sort of the basic civil rights or things that we would consider, basic freedoms, like the ability to go swimming in a lake without having to check if that lake is, legally verified to, sort of personal responsibility. And if someone does something stupid that ends up hurting them, then it's better that person suffers for that thing than everyone being charged with not being able to do something or having their freedoms taken away. And with the pandemic specifically, obviously, we can see many, many freedoms being taken. And not only that, because that in itself might be, bad enough, but the normalization of it, the acceptance that people are showing to having their freedoms taken away, obviously in the name of safety and security, is what's really worrying. Because if, the other things that I've spoken about, it's less clear, although I believe it's also a part of it, less clear how the conspiracies might be directly related. When it comes to civil rights, that is always the underlying issue, I think, of almost any conspiracy, is that the public is being lied to and manipulated by, the authorities. So that's obviously a very, very big issue that I believe, I hope not, and I hope that I'm wrong, but we will see. I believe that in the coming years, it will become a more area for concern, and that we really should be paying attention to. And if we look at China as anything about, the future, or some kind of signs that we can read to see what's to come, it's definitely a very scary situation. In fact, I watched, I can't actually remember. I think it was the Joe Rogan podcast. I watched on YouTube, and I watched a clip about the situation with China and what was being considered, etc. And it's interesting. I mean, China, as you know, we've sort of been talking about it more and more, and not really sure what we can do about it. But China definitely has this goal of becoming is now a world superpower and as replacing America, and seems to be very patient and diligent, and so far seems to definitely be on the right track. And the question is, you can't not buy something that it's at least manufactured in China in some part of the process, in our way of life. I mean, we couldn't rid ourselves of it completely. So we are now, as a system, as a global system, dependent on China. So what happens in China is obviously directly related to us. And I completely include myself in this. I want to make it absolutely clear that when I'm talking about these things, I don't at all mean to sound like I'm some high and mighty other than you. I've got a Xiaomi phone right now in my hand, and I know that it's spying on me. And I got to tell you, the one thing that really pisses me off about this phone is that it comes with all these pre-installed Chinese apps that I've now found you have some kind of software that I can download to delete them, but it's very annoying. You can't actually remove them, and anyway. I'm saying that China is something we have to pay attention to when it comes to the future and the problems that it may face. Because if I'm not sure how aware people are of what's happening in China, but following the pandemic, obviously China was the beacon of individual freedom before, but following the pandemic, things have actually become much, much worse. And this new model, which seems to be, based on George Orwell and many dystopian sci-fi films that have come up over the last 10 years or so. This kind of constant 100% monitoring through facial recognition, through GPS location, through your phones, and then, not just what is happening all over the world, but indeed making it obvious. So now you have to actually use your phone to sign in, and use your phone to go on the subway, and the what do you call it? The civilian credit. How do you call the system that they have now, where you have a credit system based on your compliance with the government, basically. I can't remember what the system is called. If you know it in chat. Anyway, if we look at all this grave change in the socialist structure of what's becoming a very important superpower in an economy that seems to show the US not in as good a position as China. Social credit score. Thank you, Rondon. Exactly. This is another issue that I believe we should be looking at very closely. So that's civil rights. The last thing that I wanted to talk about before we move on to the happy, optimistic part is employment, because I believe that, this is I think another revolution, change, shift that's happened over the last 10, 15 years. I don't know, when did YouTube start, where the whole idea, the whole day of a career and employment, and how do you prepare young students, 20-year-olds, for a life of work, and just how much this whole thing has changed and shifted from basically you have to go study in the university, you have to find the subject that will pay well enough, and then that's what you do for the rest of your life, as it was, let's say, in the 1950s, all the way to some of you, if you just upload what you do to the internet, you could make a lot of money from it. Now, obviously, this isn't open for everyone, but considering where we were, where if you were out in the middle of nowhere, you had no access. In fact, you didn't even know what you didn't have access to. And now, obviously, kids, not to be racist in any way, but children to Russian and Asian families are coming to their parents and saying, hey, yeah, I'm a professional gamer. I go and play computer games and compete and make more money than you've seen. It's a very, very new and different situation. Now, all of that, which comes under employment, and obviously the old way, is still dependent on this very fragile system. And this system, as we see, although online employment is soaring and many jobs are moving to be online, whenever you have some kind of recession, whenever you have some people losing their works, all of those people who are working online rely on the others to pay for them online. And if people stop paying, if people don't have money to pay for the services, then all of these, YouTubers and streamers and all the rest of it will be also suffering from the same situation. So although obviously employment, I mean, there are sort of two revolutions. One was this, whatever you want to call it, digital information revolution, where employment can come from geeks with their computers, where employment can come from, people playing games, where employment can come from making stupid videos with your friends, etc., etc. And that's a huge shift from going to school and studying something. And this other, not revolution, but change that's coming with the pandemic, with the way that the world will be post lockdown, post, etc., etc., whatever it may be. And I think that obviously COVID has kicked everything into high gear. People are seriously thinking, and if not thinking, then they are suffering from their choice of employment, because a lot of people have A, lost it, and B, not really sure what or when things will change and things will come back. So employment, I felt, is important enough as a society, as a generation, as a species, and again, as individuals, for us to think about when it comes to the future. Now, to end this thing on a very sad note, I wanted to quote, it's actually a quote that I shared on Facebook a while back, and it's by Henry David Thoreau. It's from his book Walden, and Walden is the book that he wrote following his experiences in the forest when he lived there for, I can't remember how many years, but he lived this self-sufficient life there. Now, it's a bit archaic, so I hope you bear with me, but you can get the general gist of what he's saying. So I put it up in the chat, and it goes like this. It is very evident what mean and sneaking lives many of you live, for my sight has been whetted by experience. Always on the limits, trying to get into business and trying to get out of debt. A very ancient slough, and others brass, for some of their coins were made of brass. Still living and dying and buried by this other's brass, always promising to pay tomorrow, and dying today. Insolvent, seeking to curry favour, to get custom by how many modes, not only state prison offences, lying, flattering, voting, contracting yourselves into a nutshell of civility, or dilating into an atmosphere of thin and vaporous generosity, that you may persuade your neighbour to let you make his shoes, or his hat, or his coat, or his carriage, or import his groceries for him, making yourselves sick, that you may lay up something against a sick day, something to be tucked away in an old chest, or in a stocking behind the plastering, or more safely in the brick bank, no matter where, no matter how much or how little. Right, so if you haven't read it, it's a fantastic book. Quite dark, and the general feeling, I think, of this existence that we see around us today, which he obviously wrote a long time ago, but I think is relevant still today. And he wrote this following his experiences of also moving to the forest and felling trees to build his own log cabin, and living alone and sourcing and hunting. I think he was using snares, and growing crops and collecting his water. And it's exactly this idea that brings me to the connection between what we've spoken about, which I feel are sort of the dangers and the outcomes of conspiracies, and self-sufficiency. And these conspiracies that we've mentioned, and indeed, I was trying to think of ones that aren't, but I think all conspiracies in their heart hold this point of keeping the public in the dark, attacking the public's right to information, the public's right to know. And this seems to be the crucial thing, because if someone is doing something and they are clear and open about it, then it's much easier to deal with. It's those things that happen behind closed doors that seem to have the most impact without our ever being able to sort of do anything about it. And so this whole idea of forces, in the shadows working, etc. I really feel that for this episode, and obviously I'm a very big proponent of the narratives and I study them greatly, and I do believe in the validity of most of them, or the ones that I speak about, I should say. But for right here and now, I would say that the validity of any conspiracy is less important. It's less important than the fact that the problems that I've mentioned are in existence today, whether their cause is a conspiracy or not. Regardless, these problems are here, or they are coming. And we need to, in some way, I think, deal with them, especially if we have a way to deal with them. And I think that the number one issue here, when it comes to it, is we are facing, in a certain way, a battle over consciousness. And this is, in the words of the Conspiracies outlook, there is a war on human consciousness to sedate and to enslave us as a species so that we don't rise up and fulfill our full potential. Now, without the conspiracy side of it, that still seems for me to be very, very relevant today. Indeed, in Henry David Thoreau's very acute words, this idea that humanity is sort of existing in this state of survival is very difficult, and I'm not really sure, what other reason there is for us to get here, but we definitely should be doing something differently from here on out. I think we can all agree. And that's exactly where self-sufficiency, for me at least, comes into it. Because the answer to all of these questions as I go down is indeed self-sufficiency. And I was trying to think of what term best fit what I wanted here, because I was thinking about sort of agriculture or regenerative agriculture or sustainability. But it really is self-sufficiency. And Mariano, I didn't even see you were here. Welcome. Sorry, I missed. Is anyone in chat? Welcome. Thank you for coming. It's a war between good versus evil, dark and light, ignorance and wisdom. Yes, and that is something that is so prevalent in all the conspiracies. And I think that when we look at it today, those terms which might sound slightly more archaic can be as relevant when we consider it as modern technological terms. And I think one of the great ways, I'm going to get back to what I was saying, I didn't forget, but it's interesting what you said, Marianne. I want to actually talk about it because one of the great ways to frame it actually came to me from a lecture about filmmaking. I'm very interested in filmmaking in general, for those who don't know, and he spoke about it as when an audience is watching your art, they're actually giving you their attention. And attention is a commodity, and in fact a very valuable commodity, perhaps the most valuable commodity that we have. Attention, it's our time and it's our mental energy that we are giving to something. And we see in our society today that it's carved in a way to use up our attention as efficiently as possible on a lot of things that aren't necessarily the healthiest choice for us. And this doesn't matter, again, if it's a conspiracy, which I believe in, or if it's just, the way things are and how human species have evolved or whatever. The fact of the matter is that our attention is one of our most prized possessions that we really wouldn't want to give up. And so with all of these problems in mind, I would suggest, or at least this is why I live the life that I do, that we turn our attention much more towards what we can do. And if you look at all of these, the economy, drinking water, climate change, civil rights, and employment, 4 of those can be solved by becoming self-sufficient. I should say three of those because if you don't need money because you're self-sufficient, then the economy doesn't bother you as much. If you make your own drinking water, i.e. collect and purify, then you have drinking water. And if you are actually surviving, then you don't need employment from the outside. So those three are easy. Next is civil rights and climate, which are slightly different. And I see I've got about 10 minutes on the clock, so I hope I'll make it through all of this. I ended up going a little bit too much. How was this episode so far? Let me know in the comments how you felt about it, so that I'll have an idea if you want to chime in. But for now, I will try and get through these two in time. It should be okay. So, when it comes to civil rights, obviously, if someone comes knocking down my door with a gun and says you're going to jail, there isn't much I can do. But if we look at the Chinese system, it's all based on the civilians' willingness to participate in the system. And this is very crucial. Now, this is this is a big gamble. This is kind of how I'm planning my life, because I hope that this will work out. And I hope that what's going to happen in the future is the governments are going to be more and more focused on the people who are willing, who want to be in the system, and obviously trying to convince as many people to want to be in the system, rather than sort of taking energy or punishing or going after people who simply don't want to be in the system, aren't interacting with it, and aren't, affecting it or damaging it in any way. So that's why I feel that when it comes to civil rights, as long as I am dependent on the system, and the more dependent I am, the worse it is, the more hold they have over my civil rights. Because, again, in the pandemic, businesses were forced to close. Well, they can close the businesses because they're, a business of the economy, of the government, blah, blah, blah. They've been given the right to open their shop. Whereas, as it's happening now, if you make lemonade in your, backyard and you sell it to someone and nobody finds out, because that's illegal and you can't do that and you shouldn't do that. But if you were, no one would stop you. So this idea of stopping our civil rights, of working and even of movement. Now, obviously, if you're in the city, if you're using the subway, if they close down all of the roads, etc., they have a very strong hold on being able to control people's movements. However, if you live on a large enough piece of land, which is your own property, or if you live out in the countryside where there's less policing or whatever it is, the further away from the system that you are, the less hold they have over our civil rights. So again, this obviously isn't a complete solution to government power, which I think is a real problem, and we might talk about that another time. But when I'm approaching these problems, I'm seeing where, what is it that I can do? Sure, there's a lot that I can't do, more than I would like, but what are the things that I can do? If I become self-sufficient, if I remove myself and take away the power from the governments over my survival, then they have less, it's harder for them to impede on my civil rights. Whereas if I have to go to work, and in order to go to work, I have to flash my phone. In order to have flash my phone, I have to be compliant with the government, because otherwise my rating goes down. Then it doesn't matter for flash, etc., etc. Then it's much, much easier for the government to say, okay, well, just switch this person off, and now we don't need guns, we don't need police, we don't need to arrest him. He simply can't survive because he's out of the system. And the last thing is climate. Now, when it comes to climate, and this is also slightly related to drinking water, as I mentioned, okay, there's climate change. Let's even go so far to say it's being caused by massive companies that are polluting, or whoever you want to blame. What can I do about it? And for those who know Pierre Yeoman's scale of permanence, climate is right up there in those things that we have the hardest time affecting. We can't apply any change to. But this is where we need to get a little optimistic, perhaps, in my mind at least. And that is that we actually can affect the climate. And I think that whatever the belief is or not, we know that deforestation leads to desertification. And desertification actually causes or decreases the amount of rain. And so I always grew up thinking it doesn't rain in the desert. But that actually turns out it's not entirely true. it doesn't desert where it rains. No, but what I'm saying is that if something is desertified, then that will lead to a shortage of rain, and not necessarily the other way around. And so if we reverse that, if we think about reforestation actually leads to an increase in rain. So the way that we conduct our natural environment here does have a profound effect on the climate. Obviously, this isn't a sort of, if you plant 1 million trees in 1 year, then the next year it's going to pour. It's not that kind of process. It's a long, slower process. But nonetheless, it is something that we have an effect over. And if we're building concrete houses, if we're stripping away, forests, and we're cutting back to the bare earth, and we're letting all of the rainwater just go into the sewage, then we are affecting the climate in that sense. And so again, as individuals, and this is a grand scale way of thinking about it. Oh, hi, Archangel Gabriel. Wonderful to have you here. Did you just come? I didn't see you before. Welcome as always. I'm just going to finish up this thought. But when we think about, the things that we can do as individuals, and obviously this is more relevant to people with their own land, but even wherever we live, basically, to think about the natural environment as the biggest access we have to affecting the climate that we live in. Oh, excellent. You see, that's the best avian flu because, no sewage here, compost only, and we pee in the woods. That's conserving those minerals, which we could be talking about as well. But all of those things that are enhancing the natural environment, that are helping plants and trees grow, are actually able to affect the climate, the rainfall, the way that our natural environment behaves on a much larger scale, if we think about it. And so, my final point for all this, and I hope that it was understandable for those of you who are still here. When I think about, when I came across these conspiracy theories, when I came across these ideas of man's enslavement of the economy and the capitalist system simply, locking people into this situation where they can't get out no matter what, in a state of survival, I was really, really frustrated and really depressed for a long, long time because I didn't know what to do. And then I found this, and I found this idea of self-sufficiency, where all of those problems that are caused by this state of survival, if you deal with that state of survival on the most basic, primitive level, taking care of your survival needs, then all of those other dangers that come from a pandemic, from when supermarkets close, from an EMP pulse, from the oil running out, whatever it may be, all of those affect our survival in a grave way. The more I work to providing my own survival and becoming self-sufficient, the more I am getting away from that system, from those shackles that are tying me down to this system of control where the government basically holds all the cards. Okay, wow. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was in some way entertaining, enlightening, educational. Those were a few of my thoughts because, I felt the need to share them. Oh, thank you, Mariana. I appreciate it. Avian Flu said, I never want a house. I prefer living on Earth. I've never been happy with my living arrangements since getting rid of walls, doors, and a roof and a floor. Absolutely. I have very exciting news. We're actually getting rather close to raising our teepee. And as those of you who know, the teepee is actually on a cob floor. So we're going to be living on earth floor, which is, can't wait. It's something that I really, really want to have. Auntie Commie Blood, you missed my show, but you're just in time for Avian Flu's show. So you're okay. But nevertheless, if you do want to listen, don't forget the podcast is out in all the apps and in Aurel, Aurel, the new podcast app that goes with Hive. So check it out if you haven't already. I'm on there. All the great Hive podcasts are there. I'll be here next week with another show. It's been a pleasure as always. And stay tuned for more. Until then, take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones. Have a great one. Post up next. Stay tuned for that. Great show. I'll see you all next week. Bye.